Good day, everybody. Thanks for joining me here for a little kind of review session. My plan today is I'm going to do things in reverse that we learned them. So we just started this week with this idea of selective breeding, and so that's how I'm going to start the kind of review vid, and then I'm going to work my way backwards to Gregor Mendel. So pictured, you see 3 pics here, and all of these are examples of selective breeding. There was a human kind of in control of these reproductions, and over time they selected the most desirable trait to reproduce, and the undesirable trait was either eaten in some cases or just not reproduced. So let's talk about the chickens, right? 1957, here's kind of the average size of a chicken. So every time that a chicken would reproduce, they would take the largest chickens and they would select them to keep breeding. And if you were kind of an average or a small chicken, you would not be selected to breed. What happened was, over about a 20-year period, the average size of a chicken started to grow, because the bigger the chicken was, the more they made that chicken reproduce to continue to produce larger chickens. You'd want larger chickens so that you could yield more meat and thus feed more people, make more money. Now you look in 2005, the average mass of a chicken has quadrupled in a matter of about 50 years, and the majority of that is going to be due to selective breeding. If we take a look over in the top right, you can see 1645. That's what a watermelon used to look like. A watermelon had seeds in it, had very little fleshy fruit, and it had a lot of that rind that not a lot of people actually like to eat and doesn't have a whole lot of flavor. You can see the same with a banana. The fruits that we eat today have been selectively bred mainly to minimize the number of seeds in them. There's very few fruits that people enjoy eating the seeds. So we've either made the seeds disappear through selective breeding, or we've made the seeds get smaller. So believe it or not, that is a kind of an ancient banana from a few centuries ago. Lots of seeds in that banana, and what we did was we just continued to take a look at the fruit. The bananas with lower numbers of seeds, we would take those seeds and have them reproduce more often, because there's not a lot of foods out there where we desire as humans to eat the seed. We prefer more of that fleshy fruit. So lastly, there is some more examples of dogs, and then an example of how dog breeds have really even changed over time since we've really started doing artificial selections of dogs. So you can see the bull terrier, if you look at the snout of the bull terrier, has been selectively bred to kind of have that crowned face, kind of that almost rounded face, and pointy ears, whereas its earlier generations had more of a standard dog face, and its ears were flapped. You can see the bulldog has been bred to be thicker and have shaggier skin, which ultimately, if you raise bulldogs, you know that then can be tough on the dogs, but it was more or less bred for its looks. Okay, and then lastly, the basset hound on the bottom right, you can see that its ears have gotten considerably longer, its nose has gotten considerably bigger. The basset hound is really specialized in being a scent hound, and it has an incredible sense of smell and is a great dog used to kind of sniff out things that you want. So again, kind of going in reverse, some more examples of selective breeding that humans have done where we control the parent generation in order to produce an offspring with traits that we tend to like more often. Alright, so taking a look here now, we're looking at a set of traits about peas. So this is just a shot from that textbook reading from last week. Ultimately, you have different traits, right? And you learned that some of these traits are dominant and some are recessive. So then we took that and we applied that more to our prior knowledge, and we started using these words, and they're sort of interchangeable. The words like hybrid, purebred, and homozygous and heterozygous. So ultimately, some things that I just kind of want to recap here and review is a dominant trait means that its genes, its genotype, when we represent them in letters, is always going to use capital letters. So if you are a dominant trait, we would expect to see capital letters in your genotypes. So we're going to use flower color, for example. Purple is dominant. There's 2 ways that you can be a purple flower. So you can have two capital P's, and you would be homozygous dominant, or you can have a capital and a lowercase p, and we call that heterozygous. Okay. The only way that you would be a white p then would be if you are recessive, meaning you have two lowercase recessive genes. Again, where do these letters come from? Your parents, or the parents of the offspring, have chromosomes. Those chromosomes are made up of DNA, and on those chromosomes, you have these genes. And genes are not all the same. There's dominant genes and there's recessive genes. So if you are the purple plant and you are homozygous dominant, that simply means that one parent gave you a dominant P and the other parent gave you a dominant P as well. So you got to think all the way back to should this dog be called Spot? That was all the way back when we first started talking about dominant and recessive traits. Okay, so when we look at all of these traits, we noticed that when we crossed a yellow and a green pea, all peas were yellow because yellow is dominant. Okay, this is the basics in order to understand how to set up a Punnett square. So when you look here, you got to know the difference between what does it mean to be dominant and recessive, what does it mean to be homozygous and heterozygous. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some Punnett square problems and go from there. Take a look at that beauty. That'd be that Punnett square. Made a little custom green one for y'all, so just getting a little wild here in the basement with the Punnets. Really, I just want to take an opportunity to work through one or two problems. When it comes to the assessment, more importantly, solving a Punnett square is actually really exceeding. I mean, that's going to land you up in like a 95% range. But you can't solve a Punnett square if you don't know kind of what the terms are in order to properly set up a Punnett square. So I'm going to try my best to just do a couple of problems and give you an opportunity to just kind of walk through a problem, but also hear and see the kind of terms in action. One last shot here. So we use a Punnett square when we are looking to predict the probability of two parents, what their offspring's traits might look like. So we did some SpongeBob in the beginning. I'm just going to throw together some SpongeBob questions. So we're going to talk about SpongeBob's grandparents. Okay, SpongeBob's grandpa was a heterozygous for SquarePants, and SpongeBob's grandma was heterozygous. So that word hetero means different. So when we're talking about alleles, the letters, they can't be the same. And what I mean by that is not that one should be an A and a B, is that one should be an uppercase and one should be a lowercase. So they're going to be heterozygous for square pants. Okay, so what that means is one of them is going to be a capital S. Whew, that was brutal. One of them is going to be a lowercase s. Okay, the other one is a capital S and a lowercase s. What I've seen looking at some of your guys' practice work is some of you are using different letters. You're using like an S and a P, and it's just, we don't do that. When we write the genotype, when we write the two letters, it needs to be the same letter. What your options are is their letters are going to be capital, capital, capital lowercase, or lowercase, lowercase. Okay, so in this case, these two dominant S's, okay, those are going to get passed into this box. This dominant S is going to get passed down there. This dominant S is also going to get passed there, right? So I'm going to have this as my outcome. So what that means is, overall, there is a 3 out of 4 chance that they're going to have square pants. And what I mean by that is if you are homozygous dominant, homozygous meaning same, and dominant meaning uppercase, you're going to have square pants. These two heterozygous genotypes, right, going to have square pants. And then this guy down here, this is the one homozygous recessive for round pants. So if you have two heterozygous parents, it's always going to be a 3-to-1 ratio. But one is going to be homozygous dominant, one is going to one heterozygous, and one homozygous recessive. Okay? Alright, so let's try just one more here, see how it goes. I want to stick with SpongeBob, but I'm going to do sponge color. Okay? We're going to say that yellow sponges are dominant and pink sponges are recessive. So yellow is dominant, pink is recessive. We're going to have a heterozygous sponge reproduce with a homozygous recessive sponge. So think about that for a moment. How do you set up the Punnett square? Pause and think for a moment. You're going to have a heterozygous parent cross with a homozygous recessive parent. How are you going to set up that Punnett square? Can you picture what those letters are, what those genotypes are? Okay, so heterozygous parent. I'm going to use Y's. Why? Because I can. Okay, when it comes to a genotype, you can really use any letter you want. Just try to pick a letter that the uppercase and lowercase are kind of easy to tell the difference between. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay, ask yourself, what parent is that? That's the heterozygous parent, one capital Y, one lowercase y. What color is that sponge? Is it yellow or pink? Okay, then up on top. Okay, there's your homozygous recessive parent. What color is their sponge, right? What's their phenotype? So their phenotype here is going to be pink. Okay, this parent's phenotype is going to be yellow. Right? So let's fill out the Punnett square. Right? Take a look at our chances. We have a 2 out of 4 or a 50% chance that your offspring will be heterozygous. Okay. And we have a 50% chance, 2 out of 4, that they will be homozygous recessive. Alright, so there's a little bit of Punnett square practice. So I want to finish off this little review video with going back to kind of the first thing we started with genetics, and that was the idea of a family tree. Right? This idea that we pass traits from grandparents to parents, from parents to children, and so on and so forth. And the traits that we pass are inherited traits, right? Traits that are in your DNA. So, again, inside of each of every one of your cells, you have 46 chromosomes. You got 23 from your mom, 23 from your birth dad. Okay? On those chromosomes, these big long strands of DNA, there's these tiny sections of DNA called genes. These genes, they code for your traits. Okay? But not all the genes are the same. Right? Sometimes genes are dominant and sometimes they're recessive. So when we take a look here at this little family tree, we have grandparents, parents, kind of aunts and uncles, and then kids. So you can see down at the bottom there's one that says me. Okay? If you're light blue, you do not have a widow's peak, meaning your hairline on your forehead does not come to a point. If you're purple, it means you have a widow's peak. So the boy there says me. He doesn't have a widow's peak. And you notice it says brother, okay, is purple, has a widow's peak. Their parents, notice dad does not have a widow's peak. Mom does not have a widow's peak. And so we would start to ask ourselves questions like, well, how can somebody get a widow's peak when one of their parents doesn't have it? And what we know is that widow's peaks are dominant. Okay? So if we understand how traits are passed from generation to generation, inherited traits, we can kind of trace them back and see, oh, well, I got my widow's peak from one of my grandmas, because it turns out both of the grandmas in this case have a widow's peak, which they then went and passed on to their offspring. But then it turns out, no, you definitely didn't get your widow's peak from this grandma, because your daddy-o doesn't have a widow's peak. So you got the widow's peak, which came on grandma's DNA that she passed on to your mom, and then your mom passed it on to your sibling. Right? So if you think back all the way back to those family trees show you traits that are inherited. The other alternative is your ability to acquire traits, which is your ability to learn traits from your surroundings. So your ability to dance. There's no such thing as your dance gene, right? You don't just have it or you don't. You can practice. You can acquire it. So when you think about yourself as an individual and you think about kind of the traits that you have, you either got your traits, again, from your parents' DNA being passed to you. That's called inherited. Or you acquired the trait from your environment.